Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Power of Inclusive Play. Today's presenter is Marnie Norris with Shane's Inspiration, and with a special introduction by Jane Genuine with Landscape Structures. We invite you to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the question box. Also, this webinar will be available on the NAESP Foundation's website, www.naespfoundation.org. I am now going to hand over the formal introductions to Jane.
Thank you, Anne. I'm Jane Genuine with Landscape Structures, and I have the pleasure of introducing our presenter, Marnie Norris, who is the Director of Programs for Shane's Inspiration. Shane's Inspiration is an international nonprofit dedicated to creating social inclusion for children of all abilities. And Landscape Structures has had the privilege of partnering with them over the last decade. Not only does Shane's design and develop the most amazing inclusive playgrounds, they do something no other organization in the country does. They go beyond the playground by delivering educational programs to schools and communities. Landscape Structures is extremely committed to inclusive play, and we are proud to partner with Shane's to bring their inclusion lunchbox program to schools everywhere, and you'll hear about that today from Marnie. So I'd like to introduce Marnie, who I have had the pleasure of knowing and watching her work. Not only does she have a great background and great experience, I think she may be the single person who has spent more days on playgrounds with kids of all abilities than anyone in the world. Well, at least my world. So there you have it, Marnie. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you. I've logged an embarrassing number of hours on the playground. So I would love to say thank you to all of you for being here. We know that as principals, as educators, you have 9 million things on your plate. And as one teacher gently reminded me the other day, it's closer to 10. So thank you for taking the time to explore social inclusion on the playground. We really appreciate your attendance and your participating. And I would love to emphasize, please submit your questions as they come to you or your concerns. It'll turn my monologue into a conversation, which would be wonderful for me. And it would also help us just stay relevant. If there's any social issues that you're encountering on your school campus, let us know so that we can tackle those as they come up through the content of the webinar, okay? So we're going to get started and jump in. Jane told you about who we are. We grew out of a memorial project for a family who lost their newborn son in 1998. And we partnered with the City of Los Angeles to create the first fully inclusive, fully accessible playground in the western U.S. At that time, inclusion on the play space was still just beginning. Once the ribbon was cut on that playground in 2000, the requests for more came flooding in. So we realized the demand out there was vast. And it was about our second or third playground. We were doing a community design workshop, which we do with all our play spaces, that a mom stood up and asked a question that for us really illuminated what the barriers are out there for children with disabilities. She said that children with disabilities carry contagious diseases, and she wanted to know what we were going to do to protect her kids. That was a question that took us aback and gave us an incredible insight into the invisible barriers that prevent social inclusion from happening. So we're going to tackle some of those barriers today and how social inclusion can help dissolve them. So first, just getting a quick understanding of disability. So we know under the ADA, it's somebody who has a physical, mental, or sensory impairment that can substantially limit activities. This website right here, the www.teachnology.com, has a great section on the most common disabilities found on school campuses. Obviously, from looking at this list, they are vast. They are wide. There's a lot of different conditions out there. Developmental disabilities are the most pervasive. That includes learning disabilities, dyslexia. This stat below, 1 in 6 were diagnosed between 2006 and 2008, illustrates it's an incredible part of our population and community. And I bet if I took a poll out there, every single one of you would probably have 5 or more kids at the tip of your tongue that you would offer up as having some sort of developmental sensory challenge, and they have not been diagnosed yet. So that's another issue as well. And when we're talking about barriers between children with and without disabilities, the physical barriers, the physical differences in children with disabilities are easier to overcome and embrace. Often it is the behavioral and communication differences that come up with sensory and developmental disabilities that are the hardest for kids with typical abilities to address on the playground. So we're going to go into those as well. But it really is, it's the developmental and sensory processing challenges that can be much harder to promote social inclusion with. So given who's on your playground every day, I'm not going to spend too much time on the benefits of play because you guys all know them far better than I do, I'm sure. But one of the things that struck me as I've learned and grown in this field is the incredible link between brain development and play, that it really does inspire brain growth from the infancy on. It impacts every single level of functioning for children. And for children with disabilities, it's even more critical, given the myriad of challenges they face on a daily basis. Play is their vehicle to having a social community. Without some sort of inclusion through play, it's very hard for them to create community. There's a quote from a special ed teacher here in Los Angeles that always struck me. She said, "Our children don't get invited to birthday parties. They don't have play dates. If they're more severely impacted by their conditions, their social circle is much smaller." And play is a critical and wonderful way to start creating that community and those connections. So what is inclusive play? The obvious, it is getting kids with and without disabilities in the same space at the same time so that they can begin to engage. From our perspective, just having them in the same space at the same time isn't always enough. But it's a good start to creating inclusive play. Out of all of these bullet points, the one that, from our perspective, is critical is the positive and reciprocal relationships. It's critical that the children with disabilities and without connect to each other with each other rather than having the peers with typical abilities taking care of. When you're the caregiver, you're not on the same footing socially as the person who's receiving the care. So finding ways to create those connections in a reciprocal way is a very important ingredient in our minds to inclusive play. Also, the next bullet point, respect, is being fostered by the adults who monitor and support the play. Our feelings, our personal responses to disabilities have a significant impact on our reactions to kids and on how we support the kids. And then I love this last one, impairment is what we have, disability is what we experience. So the attitudes of others are actually quite disabling versus the condition itself. So the long-term benefits of inclusive play, again, these are intuitive, they're obvious. The socialization, integration, staff awareness can create a top-down, bottom-up understanding of social inclusion, how to support it, why it's critical. Awareness in children with typical abilities. But the end goal really is the reduction in conflict and the reduction in bullying on the school campuses. So a quick story. I had a 5th grade boy in a classroom in Los Angeles. In our ability awareness workshop, he raised his hand and he said, you know, I'm a little nervous to go on our field trip tomorrow. And I said, why? And he said, because there's a boy in the other class, meaning the special education class, that I haven't been that nice to. And I'm afraid he's not going to want to play with me. So he and I brainstormed for a while as to what he could do, and we decided, okay, when we start our field trip, he's going to apologize to this boy. So the next day came, and I was facilitating interactive play with these 2 groups of students. And the 5th grade boy marched right up to the buddy from the special ed class and said, "My name is John and I'm sorry." And the boy in the special ed class had no idea what he was apologizing for, but he took his hand and they went off onto the playground. Now, that's not going to solve all the problems and the social conflict in that school, but it was a really good start in the right direction. So inclusive play can begin to dissolve some of the barriers and the misunderstandings that lead to conflict. So now we're going to get straight to the barriers. What are they? And how do we overcome them? So our first step, whether we're working with students, staff, or parents actually, is to understand how are we defining disability and what are our personal responses to disabilities. Everybody has one. Everybody has an emotional reaction to disabilities, whether you have a disability yourself, love someone who has one, or you have very little interaction with people who have disabilities. We all have certain core feelings, and those core feelings can dictate a lot. So what does the word disability mean? Most students, and this is reflecting 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students, 95% of them will say unable, can't do. And we've worked in over 150 classrooms now and have reached, gosh, well over 20,000 children in this education program. Predominantly, over and over, they decode the word, unable, can't do. So that's their definition that they're starting from. Then when we decode the feelings, they come down to, I feel sad, bad, afraid of, uncertain, and worried. In one set of, in our in-class workshop, we do a written evaluation. We start off with a written evaluation to assess attitudes. And in one classroom alone of about 30 kids, the words sad and bad were used 90 times. So that is, there's a predominant emotion around disabilities, and that dictates a lot. And the responses in their parents, incidentally, really don't differ that much. So we know where a lot of our attitudes come from. So all of those feelings are based on some pretty core misconceptions about disabilities. And these are the ones that we have run into time and time again. Obviously, the mother spoke to the first bullet point that we talked about at the very beginning. There's a misunderstanding about the difference between disability and disease. There's an understanding that children are fragile, they're dangerous, they can't understand or interact with you, or they're not as intelligent. That bottom bullet point is really the perspective of adults. But there are a lot of core misconceptions that exist. And from those misconceptions, actions arise, right? So I had another quick story. I had a girl in a classroom in Los Angeles. We were talking about the special education class that this general ed class was going to partner with and play with on the playground. And the little girl was talking about a peer with Down syndrome in the special education class. And her comment was that her best friend told her not to stand in line in the lunch line next to her because she was crazy. So based on some pretty core, and for her crazy just meant outside of what we consider normal behavior, normal communication. So those core misconceptions lead to very real actions, which I'm sure many of you see on a daily basis. And all of those actions, the avoiding eye contact, the moving away from, the trying too hard to help, have an impact, and they have a lifelong impact. For children with more moderate to severe disabilities, the social exclusion can last a lifetime. There's a lot of statistics and studies out there about impact, but the one from this slide that is most, that hits home the hardest for me is the 85% of adults with disabilities, and these were all adults with developmental disabilities, who participated in a study, reported losing their jobs due to a lack of social skills. They learn the social skills from their peers, and they learn them early. So social exclusion has a very real impact on a child's ability to grow into an adult who can go out into the workplace, go out into the community, and integrate with peers. So our next task is, how do we get past those? How do we get past the barriers? For a Change Inspiration, we do it through our education program. We have taken our inclusive playgrounds and turned them into classrooms where children with and without disabilities really do get the opportunity to get to know each other one-on-one. So for us, inclusive play has been a very powerful way to dissolve the barriers that exist. So our education program works in 3 steps. The first step is the in-class ability awareness workshop. We have developed this workshop kindergarten through 12th grade. At the elementary school level, obviously our workshop for 3rd through 5th grade is more detailed. It's a 60-minute presentation that includes the written assessment. How do we define disability? When I see someone with a disability, I feel. What are our core reactions to disabilities? We take all of those and we pull out the key words and we write them on the board outside of a giant circle. So we write sad, bad, unable, can't do, some of the key reflections that we get back from their written evaluations. The next step is we play a fast-paced game called Watch Out, It's Catching. And this is a game show that we play with the kids. We put a buzzer, it's family feed style. We put a buzzer in between the kids, and we line them up in 2 rows, and we hold up flashcards with assumptions on them. Like, if you have a disability, you're sick. And as soon as they know true or false, they hit the buzzer, and then as a group, we get to decide, was that assumption true or is that assumption false? So it helps us walk them through some of those core assumptions we just looked at and dispel them. And then the next step after that is our education video. And at the end of this PowerPoint, there is going to be a link to the video that you can either watch or download, as well as a couple PDFs that, that present some of this information. In the video, there's 3 kids, and they all have different disabilities, and it shows a day in their life. It shows what they can do. That some of them play karate, some of them are wicked Wii boxers, some of them are painters, some of them are musicians. And it gives children a chance to see beyond the categories and see the people. And then we capture those reflections on the inside of the circle. And oftentimes the words are awesome, he's fun, he was strong, they're funny, they're intelligent. And then we contrast both those words so they get to see how when you get to know somebody, on the inside, you see beyond some of those assumptions that we make. And then we have a hands-on activity. It's a disability simulation exercise that explores what the perspective might be like if you had that disability. And we have exercises tailored to specific disabilities. So if you have a large number of children with autism on your campus, we have exercises that are tailored towards that. Or if you have a lot of children with communication delays, we have exercises tailored towards that. And then the very last piece that we do in the classroom with the kids is we give them tips and tools. How do we play with somebody who doesn't use words to communicate? How do we play with somebody whose nervous system is working different than yours, and for whom sound might be a challenge? How do we play with somebody who uses a wheelchair? So we give the children tips and tools on how they can engage successfully with their buddies. Our next step is to host an interactive play experience. So here in Los Angeles, we do them on our playgrounds because we have a good number of inclusive playgrounds to choose from, but we also do them on school campuses themselves. If you have an area that is playable, that's enclosed, and we can transform it into something fun. We bring out a ton of toys, balls, bubbles, sand, water tables, musical instruments. We create a wide variety of sensory experiences, given the number of children with autism out there, that will appeal to them and help them connect in with their peers. And we're going to go into in a little bit how children with autism can react on the playground, what some of the behaviors look like, and how they can be supported. So for some of our schools, we're scheduling half-hour play sessions. One school is doing Fun Fridays. So Friday, every other Friday, I believe, for about 20 minutes, they're scheduling a play session between the general and special education students. And they're themed. So one Friday is Bubble Friday. One Friday is going to be Sound Play. One Friday is going to be Chalk Play. So there's ways to make this play experience very manageable so that it doesn't tax staff and it doesn't add an additional element that is too extensive to the students. So this, we're just going to look at really quickly who buddies with who. We have certain guidelines that we follow when we buddy children with and without disabilities. It's usually a 2-to-1 ratio if the students have more significant disabilities. If they are more mildly impacted by their disabilities, one-on-one is fine. And if the child has autism and has a very hard time engaging socially, one-on-one can be a better match, because 4-to-1, 3-to-1, even 2-to-1 sometimes can be overwhelming. For our younger students, we group them. So we group 5. If we get a group of 5 students, we have 3 who are typically developing and 2 who have different abilities, and we let them play in smaller groups. And obviously, we look at height and size. If you have a child using a wheelchair, whoever's helping to push that wheelchair has to be a little bigger and stronger. We look at age. We look at who's active and who's passive. I had a little boy in a general education classroom who had ADHD, and he was talking to me a mile a minute during our classroom workshop and jumping up and down and running around the classroom. So when we got onto the playground, I paired him with a peer with autism who was running a mile a minute. And about halfway through the field trip, this little boy with ADHD came running up to me and he said, "Miss Marnie, you have no idea. This is the best field trip ever. He runs as fast as I do. He talks as fast as I do. He thinks as fast as I do. I've never met anyone like him." So that was a perfect pairing because they were both incredibly active and could relate to each other. We look at maturity level and we look at past history. Sometimes when students have siblings with autism, they would rather be paired with somebody who doesn't reflect the experience that's happening for them at home, or sometimes it's the opposite. Toys and games, we had just briefly mentioned those. We brought out everything. We bring books onto the playground. We bring everything under the sun, because you never know what's going to appeal and what's going to help students interact. The whole purpose of our toys is to promote communication and interaction. So we try to reach for everything under the sun. I would recommend a lot of sensory toys. The textured balls, squeezable balls, often help children who have sensory processing challenges. They can squeeze them, touch them, and it helps re-regulate their nervous system a little bit. So post-playdate, we do a follow-up. This can be done after a couple play experiences on your campus. It can be done after the very first. It just gives the kids who are typically developing the chance to debrief and the chance to synthesize everything they've learned. And the kids love to share their stories. They love to share what their buddies did, who their buddies were. And it's a nice way to bring it to a close in terms of the awareness piece. We also have a closing activity that we do that illustrates reciprocity, that it wasn't just you going out and taking care of your buddy. Your buddy taught you. Your buddy is a teacher. Your buddy is a peer, right? So both people got a significant amount out of the day, not just a one-sided experience. Then we have an academic curriculum that's modular, that's focused on the humanities. So if you want to pull interesting activities out that reflect language arts, that reflect social studies, that reflect research and writing, there are a variety of activities in that curriculum. And a take-home piece for the parents, which we strongly encourage. And we'll talk a little bit later about what Los Angeles Unified School District is doing for inclusion. It's a very well-rounded effort that also involves educating parents because they can be more afraid and resistant than their children oftentimes. And I'm a parent, so I feel like I can say that. All right, what they say, this is what some of the kids say post-field trip. And I'm not going to read all of them, but Jackson hit me particularly hard when I read his pre, which is up on top, and his post on the bottom. Disability is kind of like being the underdog. I feel sympathy, but also sometimes scared if they come near me. And then after his field trip, I had fun. My buddy had strength. When she led the way and held our hands, she brought us with her like dogs on the leash. And he did not see his pre when he wrote his post, I can reassure you. So it's an incredible reflection that he took the same image and completely flipped it. His buddy with a disability went from being an underdog to the leader of the pack. So these can be incredibly altering experiences for students with typical abilities. It can shift their awareness completely. And this is our lunchbox. The education program is packaged up. If you haven't received one and would like one, please feel free to let us know. If you have received one and would like more input into how to use it, we would love to help you. We can certainly modify it to support your needs. And we just got a question: does the program include in-service training for teachers too? It does. It does. And that was my next slide. That was wonderfully intuitive. Staff trainings, we recommend them strongly. It's important to have everybody on board and understanding. And our perceptions, as we mentioned in the beginning, our perceptions about disabilities dictate how the tone of voice we use with people with disabilities, our word choices, and our body language. And I will tell, I'm going to out myself for being unaware of my own reactions. When I was beginning this program, I had a little boy on the playground. He wasn't little, he was about 9, and he walked with a significant imbalance. So he was sort of tipped to one side as he was walking. This boy was having no problem navigating the playground. He was jumping off of things, he was running around things, he was doing wonderful, wonderful things on the playground. So we were leaving the playground where the surfacing was super even, and there was about an inch drop, and then it hit uneven dirt. So I'm walking next to him and I'm talking with him, and the second I see the drop and the uneven surfacing ahead of us, I reach out and grab his hand. And he tolerated that for about 15 seconds before he turned to me and he said, "Lady, why are you holding my hand?" Ah, yes. I needed that ability awareness training right click because I was making a gigantic assumption about his ability level. So we really recommend the ability awareness training. Obviously, it gets everybody on a similar page, at least, for understanding what the peers with typical abilities are perceiving about their peers with disabilities on the campus and how that's impacting. So it includes activities that offer perspectives on different disabilities, activities that illustrate social inclusion and exclusion, and then a group discussion on issues and challenges facing the staff. Where are your hot spots? Again, if you have a group of children on your campus who are, there's a large significant population of kids with autism or Down syndrome, we can focus activities around communication, around sensory processing. And this is an example of the tips and tools. If you go to the webinar link on our website, you can download a document called Buddy Tips. And that is, these are tips and tools that we give both to students who are typically developing, as well as staff, any interested adults. How do you speak to somebody who has a communication delay? Well, you just have to slow down, and it is okay to ask them to repeat themselves. How do we communicate without words? We communicate through actions and objects. We communicate through play. We communicate through sound. And then the bottom ones really speak to children who have autism, and we're going to get into that in a moment. And here it is. We have autism at play. Given the incredible number of children with autism out there, we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking through how they are being impacted on the playground, what that looks like, and how we can support them. Obviously, every child with a sensory processing disorder is different. No two kids are impacted the same exact way. We have children who are sound avoidant, and we have children who absolutely love certain sounds. But after we worked with some consultants and some therapists to redo our interactive play experiences to be more supportive of children with autism. And these were the core triggers that we came up with. Sound can be a big trigger. I don't know if you have ever seen children in your school with their hands over their ears, with their fingers pushed in as far as they can go. They're trying to block out some sound because it is registering too intensely for them. We get a lot of kids on the playground who are sound sensitive. Physical orientation in space. Some of our buddies with sensory processing challenges have a very hard time being in big, wide, open spaces that aren't contained and delineated. The feeling is getting lost in space. They physically have a very hard time being in those larger spaces. So with some of our kids, we see them running in loops around the play space. We may see them dropping to the ground, trying to sort of contain themselves, running into small spaces like underneath the playground. I'll show you in a second. Some kids are hypersensitive to touch. It can be a light touch. It can be a touch they don't see coming. It can be a specific texture, sound, the feeling of a fabric. Sand, and the feeling of a fabric. That touch is unbearable, and sometimes that results in hitting. It results in pulling away from. It may result in them throwing a tantrum if they keep getting bombarded with that sensation. Some are hyposensitive to touch. Their body isn't registering physical touch. That's not registering physical pressure enough. So they are the ones who are seeking that. They are jumping up and down. They are pulling, jumping, clapping their hands. Sometimes it can be loud voices. They might talk extra loud. So that'll register in different ways. And then communication. We get a lot of kids who are emerging verbal communicators who get very frustrated with their peers who are highly verbal. So that conflict can arise quite a bit when children aren't being heard, understood, and related to more on their communication path. So for our friends who have trouble with sound, quiet places, we are always looking for spaces where they can, and also for our students who get lost in space, who have a hard time in open spaces. We find the small spaces where they can be with one or two other kids, the quiet places underneath the playground, away from the noise. We even had people tell us that they pitch like a child's tent, and inside the tent they throw a pillow and a book. And that child can go into the tent to get away from the sound, to get away from the input. For some children, the playground can be a perfect storm from a sensory perspective. For our hyposensitive kids who are having a very hard time registering anything big, spinning, jumping, bouncing, sliding, swinging, things that will give them the opportunity to really feel the sensory input and register it. We were at the National Association for the Education of Young Children conference a couple weeks ago, and we had a teacher give us a great tip. She was complaining that she started out her year with a little boy who was constantly seeking stimulation. And she got into the habit of, whenever she would see him begin to deregulate, jump up and down, clap his hands, start yelling, she would direct him to go over to the wall and push as hard as he could because he had to hold up the walls. So this little boy loved it, and he would run to that wall and push with all his might, and then his friends joined him. And so, she didn't isolate him. There were a few other kids doing this. But what it did is it gave him the opportunity to engage with that deep pressure so that he could re-regulate his nervous system and then go back and join circle time again. So there are different ways and techniques to give kids the stimuli they need so that they can actually integrate and interact and participate. And then variety. We make sure, as we mentioned before, that there is a lot of variety, visual, auditory, textural, everything that will support children who have different sensory needs. And this is just a quick visual tour of some cool sensory playgrounds. There's a lot of neat stuff being done out there. Obviously there's varying financial commitments to creating it and installing it, but there's some neat sensory stuff. This little family of hippos in the bottom shoots water out their noses, or sprays water, I should say. The elephant in the upper right is a talk tube. So you talk into his trunk, and the elephant, you can't see it, but on the other side, you can listen. to the other elephant's trunk. So there's just some neat stuff out there. Again, this little turtle in the middle is a rain stick turtle. So you can see on this one wall, there's several different elements. There's the sound, there's the tactile of the stones, there's different patterns that children engage with. The mirror balls on the bottom allow children to see what's going on around them without necessarily having to engage directly with other kids. So you can weave a lot of different sensory elements into one space. I love our whale. There's options for kids who do not want to get into sand, who might be hypersensitive to touch, and for whom sand is not an agreeable feeling, still has the option of exploring the tactile of the actual animals themselves, because that's a really lovely bumpy surface and some parts are smooth. So creating variety for kids is important. Water, of course, we know you have a more limited ability for water play at our campus. But water is always a wonderful, wonderful way for kids to engage. And it's something that children, like the young man in the wheelchair, will have less opportunity to do. Who doesn't want to learn math on that stone abacus? The little boy on the bottom right is interesting because he really did not like the sound that came out of that particular play element. It was a high metallic sound, and he did not like it. He absolutely loved tracing the spirals with his finger. He loved patterns, he loved color, and he loved tracing the spirals. So you never know for children who are on the autism spectrum how they're going to engage with different elements of play equipment. And this is an examples of sound. There's a tongue drum built into the wall, and the other is chimes that are triggered by the wind. So how do we put it all together? There's a lot of different elements that go into creating inclusion. Los Angeles Unified School District is undertaking a wonderful integration program right now. They have sites where special education and general education campuses sit on the same property, but are separated, not yet integrated. So they are choosing 3 elementary school pairings this year, 3 sites, and 1 high school. And they are creating awareness from the top down and the bottom up, so putting all these pieces together. So we're working with the staff to do ability awareness workshops and also get some of the conversations articulated about what the challenges are for both sets of staff. We're doing K through 5 ability awareness trainings for all the students at the elementary schools, for the students who are typically developing. And we are doing parent ability awareness workshops so that the parents understand why the inclusion is important. They understand a bit more of the perspective of children with disabilities and how integration is going to benefit both children. And then we're going to continue to support them by facilitating the interactive play workshops, or the play dates. Those play dates are really where the critical awareness comes into play versus merely hosting an ability awareness workshop in a classroom. So. And we just got a question about indoor equipment options. That is a great question, and one that I am actually going to ask Jane to address because I know we tend to work outdoors, and when we talk about making a space fun and playable, you can certainly take an indoor space that's accessible and make it fun and playable with loose parts, with toys, with balls, with bubbles, with all the loose equipment that we use. In terms of indoor play equipment itself, that would be something that I would have to follow up on and find out more about. I'm not well versed in indoor play equipment, but I can certainly find out for you. So we are going to do a quick story. This young man in the blue sweatshirt we're going to call Sammy. And this is an example of how one play date, how one little boy was changed. Actually, 3 little boys. So Sammy started his play date stepping to the side constantly of the kids and yelling, "No, go away." So when I brought 2 buddies to Sammy to partner with him, you can imagine his response. He turned to us immediately and yelled, "No, go away." And so I responded and said, "Sammy, you want us to go away? We'll be back in 5 minutes." So we came back in 5 minutes, and I only had one student with me because I felt it would be less challenging for Sammy to play with one. And I told the peer who was typically developing what Sammy might mean when he's saying, "No, go away." It doesn't mean I don't like you. It means I'm scared and I can't do this right now. So we came back 5 minutes later with one buddy, and Sammy still said, "No, go away," but it was softer. And he began to inch out onto the playground. And his buddy and I did not interact with him. We played side by side next to him. And whatever he did, we would mirror. So if he started to drum on something, we would do it. And sure enough, the more we mirrored his actions, Sammy would turn and look at his buddy. And then he'd walk away and keep doing something else. And we stayed with Sammy for about 25 minutes until finally Sammy reached out and touched his buddy, which was a big step. After a 3-hour play date, I finally left their side and moved on. After a 3-hour play date, Sammy was sitting in the middle of 60 kids, eating a popsicle like every other kid. And when it was time to say goodbye, Sammy reached out and wrapped his buddy's arm around his waist and held him there. So he went from fear and no, go away to initiating physical contact and communication. And Sammy's buddy went from backing up after he heard no, going away to becoming his playmate and playing with him side by side. So by supporting the play and increasing the awareness in Sammy's buddies, we were able to build a bridge for both of those kids. And that bridge lasted. It was a pretty remarkable moment. So we're coming to the end, and here is all of our contact information, as well as at the bottom, like I said, you can go visit that link if you want to download information on, we have an Autism at Play sheet that you can look at that goes through the core triggers, what the behavior that results from them, and how to support them. We also have a PDF of buddy tips that talks through how we support kids in interacting with children who use wheelchairs, children who have sensory differences, and communication differences. And thank you very much for being a part of today. Hopefully it was a good and relevant hour for you guys. And I will certainly follow up on the indoor equipment piece as well.
Thank you, Marnie, for a wonderful presentation. I wanted to give everyone a chance to submit any questions that they have, so we'll just give them a few seconds to do that. I also wanted to mention that this webinar and all NAESP webinars are available at www.naesp.org. This particular webinar will be ready next week. We also invite you to join us in Baltimore in July 2013, where you can learn more about inclusive play and help build an inclusive playground at our Community Service Day. And that special event is sponsored by Landscape Structures and the NAESP Foundation. And to learn more about the conference and to register, you can visit our website at www.naesp.org. Marnie, we have a question. How have schools funded playgrounds?
Well, schools have funded them in a variety of ways. Typically, it's seeking out corporate donations. I know a lot of PTAs have spearheaded the effort and took it on as their own. And it's usually a combination of private foundations in your area. In terms of government money for playgrounds, that would be something I'd have to look into. I'm not certain what kind of local, state funding there is for that. But it is typically a combination of corporate and foundation funding. And we actually have a template school grant proposal that we're happy to share.
We have another question. Can we get a list of playgrounds?
Of playgrounds that we've developed?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. It's on our website. If you go to shanesinspiration.org and go click on playgrounds, we have a list of the playgrounds that we have completed there.
Okay, we have another question. In some states, schools provide some of the funding for playgrounds. And so someone wanted to submit that information for the attendees.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I know in Los Angeles it is definitely been a combination of mostly private funding.
Okay, well that looks like that's it. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you to Marnie and to Jane for a wonderful presentation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.